This is London Greek Radio.
Hello and welcome to All About Autism, our monthly charity show here on London Greek Radio, aimed at helping us to understand autism better so we can together create a better society for autistics and the whole autism community. My name is Dr. Chris Papadopoulos and I'll be your host up until 8 o'clock. I'm the father of 2 autistic children, the founder and lead of the London Autism Group charity, and I'm also a principal lecturer in public health at the University of Bedfordshire. Today I'm joined by my 2 lovely co-hosts as usual, and also, of course, charity volunteers, Sofia Christofi, who is herself autistic, and also Eli Golazzi, a parent of a young autistic child. How are you doing today, Sofia?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, how's your week been?
Yeah, it's been okay.
What have you been up to?
Working on my PhD.
Oh, how's that going?
It's going well.
The infamous PhD.
Yeah.
How long is that for? Is that 3 or 4 years?
It will be by the time it's finished.
Yeah, full time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did my PhD back in 2003, I think it was, at Middlesex University. Fun times. Hard, but worth it in the end. It's been a good thing to have. And Ellie, how are you doing today?
Oh, good, thanks. Good to be back. It's good to come back on and talk about interesting topics.
Yeah, we've definitely got a good topic for this particular show. It's gone quickly, hasn't it? I feel like I was here yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah, although the weather's not changed.
No.
Yeah, it's still...
We won't talk about that.
Yeah, let's have sympathy for me. I am a bald Greek man. All the heat escaping from my head. It's awful.
Oh, dear.
Anyway, so I'm delighted today that we have a wonderful, wonderful guest here in the studio in the form of Dr. Christina Malamateniou, who is the postgraduate program director for radiography at City University. Christina has worked as an academic and researcher in medical imaging for the last 20 years, having previously worked as an MRI radiographer in the University Hospital of Athens, Greece, where she qualified. She is an MRI expert, having extensively worked in brain MRIs, perinatal MRIs, and placental MRIs. She's also produced research that aims to understand how MRIs can be more accessible for autistic people, which is the focus for today's episode. How are you doing today, Christina?
All well, thank you very much, Chris, and hi everyone. Hi Sophia, and hi Ellie,
hi,
and
Christina.
Everyone listening at LDR.
Brilliant to have you on. So how's your week been, Christina?
Very nice, very hectic, a bit of teaching, a bit of research, marking, all very exciting work for the academics.
Yeah, tell me about it. So much marking, so many students. It's all fun and games, Well, it's lovely to have you on because you truly are an expert on this topic, probably one of the main experts in the world, probably on this topic of making MRIs accessible, but for the benefit of the viewer, of the listeners rather, could you give us a little bit of information about yourself so that our listeners can get a sense of who you are, please, Christina?
Of course. So I was born and raised in Athens. Actually, I was born in Athens, raised in Piraeus. My family comes from 2 different islands. My dad comes from Paros and my mom comes from Chios in Greece. And I came to the UK after I qualified as a radiographer in 2003. I have worked for a few years in the University Hospital of Athens called Attikon, and then I came to the UK to do my PhD with the Greek State Scholarships Foundation support. It was called IKI for 3 years at Imperial College London. I then graduated from the university with my PhD and worked as an academic at the University of Liverpool for 2.5 years. And then I worked again with my original team at Imperial College London and Hammersmith Hospital for another 3 years, funded by a Biomedical Research Centre fellowship. I worked in perinatal MRI, which means the MRI that happens around the period just before, during, and after someone has given birth to a baby. So this is the perinatal period. All of my research was in this area, in perinatal MRI, and then I worked after that job at King's College London for 4 years at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, and then I moved on to the University of Greenwich for nearly 3 years as their research lead. And this is where, for the first time, I worked with autistic children and their families.
Amazing. Really. So we're going to get into this really important topic of MRIs and making them, accessible for the autistic population. So we want to learn more about why that's not the case. But just before we get into it, Christina, just clarify how you got into the area of radiography. Why radiography?
For two things. Radiography combines technology and patient care. So I always loved, innovative technology, and particularly medical imaging. I love images because they can say so many stories. In particular, in healthcare, they can say stories of pain, but also of treatment and cure and healing and hope. So that's why medical imaging. So technology is one part of our job, and the other part is patient care. And this is probably the most rewarding part, because this is when you are actually making a difference in people's lives and you're helping others. So I think for me there was no doubt I was going to go into that discipline. And certainly for people who like technology and they want to give back to society, I would advise it as a very rewarding career.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds that the answer is that you very much enjoy and appreciate technology, also patient care and the power of imaging. And I suppose it makes sense, doesn't it? That medical imaging and MRIs would therefore be your ticket. And I agree, it's a very rewarding career, and you always talk very positively of it. And actually I know many radiographers, and actually consistently they seem like happier people than most people. So
Do they?
yeah, they seem very happy with their career choices. So so anyway, as listeners may know, on each monthly episode we focus on a different topic connected to autism, and for today's show, as we've been talking about, we're going to be discussing the very important topic of MRIs, that's magnetic resonance imaging, and how they can be more accessible for autistic people and their families. As is the case for all people, autistic people may need MRI scans for various health-related reasons, and such scans might be key for the diagnosis and eventual treatment of a particular health issue. MRIs are obviously a very important tool in modern medicine because it provides very detailed images that can help doctors detect and diagnose a wide range of medical conditions. So it shouldn't be the case that autistic people can't access these scans, but sadly research does suggest that this is the case. So this may be a very big contributing factor for why autistic people are very sadly at a higher risk of experiencing poor physical health with reduced life expectancy compared to non-autistic people. Is that right, Christina?
This is absolutely right, Chris. And I personally founded these facts about reduced life expectancy of autistic people because of their lack of access to healthcare provisions, including MRI. A very difficult fact to stomach, because I think everyone should have the same accessibility to healthcare to ensure quality of life and life expectancy as everyone else.
Absolutely, yeah. It is got to be a moral and ethical right that all people should have fair access to, good, effective healthcare. And it sadly isn't the case that for autistic people that's the case, and that needs to change, and that's why we're having this conversation today. So as always, we are going to very, very much welcome any listener questions or points of views that you may have, listeners. So if you have anything that you'd like to ask or share, we can read that out and discuss it live on air. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. You can text us at 0737 661 1033. That's 0737 661 1033. Or you can email us at studio@lgr.co.uk. That's studio@lgr.co.uk. You can also send me a message or a tweet on Twitter. My handle is @ChrisPaps. We really would value your input and love to hear from you. And we have a wonderful opportunity to put forward your questions to a truly international expert on this topic. So a good opportunity today. So thank you very much. It's now time for a short break, after which we're going to share some stories that specifically highlight some of the challenges that autistic people experience. And then we're going to also talk about what are the next sort of key steps that might help solve some of these problems. Welcome back, everyone. This is All About Autism. A quick reminder again to our listeners that you can text us at 0737 661 1033. That's 0737 661 1033. If you'd like for us to discuss your question or share your story, we'd really love to hear from you. Also, I'd like to give a trigger warning about the following conversation, which could be potentially upsetting for some to hear. So, Ellie, over to you.
Hi, Christina, it's Ellie.
How are you?
Hi. Christina, would you mind giving us some of the basics about MRIs, please, including why they're so important?
Of course. So a person might need to have an MRI scan for different reasons. It might be because they have a one-off, as we call it, acute event. So it might be an accident or a fall or persistent headache for a period of time, short period of time. Or they might have a chronic condition, so like a long-term condition. So this might be, something like a recurrent condition, or be a follow-up patient with oncology, or for other reasons. So someone who might have cancer, for instance. Mm-hmm. MRI scanners are huge machines. So for those of the listeners who might have had one, they can be quite imposing. Their shape is like a giant donut, and they don't look very dissimilar to the CAT scanners or the PET scanners. So they're like giant donuts, and they have a hole in the middle where the examination table slides with a patient on top. And they're called scanners because they can scan a wider part of the body. And actually, this is one of the key advantages of the MRI scanning compared to ultrasound or X-rays, for instance, because it can cover a wider area of the anatomy. Another very important advantage of MRI is that it can have amazing contrast of the image for the people to differentiate the muscle from the fat, from the lung, from the liver. So the different organs and the different parts of the body can be seen with great detail. So these are the key advantages. And the disadvantages of an MRI scan, I would say one thing is very, very loud. So when you go inside, you need to wear both headphones and, as we call them, the earplugs for maximum protection from the noise. And the other thing is that compared to other medical imaging techniques like X-ray or ultrasound, it takes much longer. So an average scan time for MRI would range between 20 to 30 minutes. It can get longer if someone participates in research. And it works with the radio frequency waves, but I won't go into the details because MRI physics can be quite complex.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. Thanks for that, Christina. So now that we've heard a little bit about what MRIs, technically are from your point of view, we actually haven't yet heard what they sound like. So what we're going to do now is we're going to play a very short 10-second audio clip just to give our listeners a clue as to how loud and uncomfortable these can sound, especially if you think about autistic people. But before we play this, I'd just like to warn you that this might be a little bit uncomfortable to hear. So if you'd rather not hear it, now's the time to lower your volume for the next 10 seconds. So here we go. So there you have it. As you can imagine, that must be very difficult for many people to hear, let alone autistic people with potential sensitivities to those kinds of sounds and situations. Sophia, I'm aware that you've had an MRI scan in the past. Does that audio clip invoke any memories for you?
Yep, so I've had 2 MRI scans because the first one wasn't particularly successful. There was a lot of things that made it difficult for me to be able to access the MRI scan. But in terms of that sound that the MRI machine makes, it's true what Christina says, that you can't appreciate quite how loud it is, because you do have to wear sort of in-ear earplugs plus over-the-ear headphones, and it's still extremely loud. So that clip gives you an idea of what it sounds like, but the volume is really intensified when you're in the scanner.
Yeah, and could you cope with it, or what was your experience like?
So I had to try to listen out for like a pattern to try and distract myself from how loud it was. I was trying to listen out for some sort of repetition, because it's very loud.
I suppose that's one way of maybe like coping with it and making it more predictable, maybe. Yeah. And were you aware that it was going to sound like this before going into it? Did you have that expectation, or was it a surprise?
So they did tell me that it would be loud, but it was much louder than I had expected it to be. And it also goes on for the duration of the scan, so it becomes quite difficult to tolerate the longer the scan goes on for. Yeah.
I mean, it's great that you managed to cope with it. Just one quick question, Christina, to you. Why is it that this needs to be so loud, this machine? I mean, what is it about the sound that needs to be there for it to work? I mean, can they not mute these sounds and still scan?
That's a very good question, and then you're going to get me a bit more technical. I will try and make it very, very simple for our listeners. So there are actually two sounds. There is a background sound, which preserves the superconductive magnet. It's a magnet that is on all the time. That's why we have to take away any metallic objects before we go into the scanner, from trying to protect people for any attraction of these objects into the scanner, any injuries. And there's also another sound, the one that we have just listened to, which is a sound of what we call the gradients. And these are the ones that they actually produce the images. So we need that sound because it works with radio waves. We need that sound to emit energy into the body and then receive back this energy in the form of an image. So actually it's quite essential for the MRI medical image formation. We have to have that sound, unfortunately, although I know that there's a lot of effort, not so successful as we speak, but hopefully people will try a bit more to reduce these sounds in the future, because they can be quite difficult to manage for the patients.
So for any budding engineers out there, there's a challenge for you. Produce some sort of sound blocking device on MRIs and become rich. There you go, and help lots of people. Ellie?
Yeah, well, thanks, Christina, for that description. Another question for you. Do autistic people with severe learning disabilities find accessing and having an MRI scan particularly challenging?
Yes, this is an excellent question. I would say that before we go into the additional, complexity of someone having a severe learning disability, autistic people, even without the learning disability, they will find accessing an MRI scan challenging for different reasons. One thing might be because of the noise, as we said, and if someone has sensory sensitivities, it might be very, very difficult to manage the time in the scanner. For some people it might be okay, but for the majority of them it might be a bit challenging to manage the time in the scanner, particularly because of the long duration. So imagine that sound we had just listened to for 10 seconds. Imagine someone who has to undergo a scan for 20 minutes. That probably builds up. It has a cumulative effect. Also, for other reasons, that scans might be less accessible and challenging for autistic people are because of the environment. So we do have lights in the room. Sometimes the lights in the room might be of the wrong frequency, in the wrong position, so they might interfere with the autistic person while they lie in the scanner to be scanned. People also have to change normally into different clothes when they go into the MRI scanning environment for safety, because we want to avoid any accidents with any metallic objects. As I said, the MRI scanner is a huge magnet and attracts anything metallic, things like coins, magnetic cards, keys, and the sharper the item is, the more dangerous for someone to get injured while in the scanner. So someone who has to change into new clothes, they might experience sensitivity with new textures of their clothes at the hospital, and this is also another challenging area. And of course, there is the need sometimes to use a dye. We call it a contrast. It's a dye that is. We use a cannulation. We use an injection in someone's upper arm to try and make the images even better for any treatment that might be needed in the future, to highlight any abnormalities or even the normal areas in the body. And these might be also quite difficult from the sensory point of view. When it comes to additional learning disabilities, severe learning disabilities, the stance currently is, although this may vary from hospital to hospital and from clinic to clinic, that people are normally using anesthetic. We call it general anesthesia, which means that the person undertakes a scan while sleeping under the anesthetic. The feeling is that this is not always necessary, although for many cases, particularly with severe learning disability, this might be the safest method. There needs to be some very thorough risk assessment before the MRI scan, because the anesthetic does not come without its own contraindications and its own implications. There are implications for the family, because it means that if someone has anesthetic in the scanner, they have to stay longer. They might have to stay the night before and the night after. And the family will have to organize accommodation for them if they want to be nearby. Might want to organize their parking, so there's a cost effect on the family. There needs to be a more specialized expert team of clinicians and anesthesiologists who manage the anesthetic, and nurses around to help if anything goes wrong. So it's more costly and it's more time consuming, and there's always the risk when someone uses, anesthesia in the patient, how they will react to that if they have never had that before. So if it can be avoided and subject to a very thorough risk analysis before the scan, then it would be nice. For many cases, it will be needed, particularly with the severe learning disabilities. Risk-benefit analysis is really important at the beginning, as everyone is different.
Thank you, Christina. That's really great. I just wanted to pick up on the sensory part of what you were talking about, because all of these issues can make the time when you're having the MRI scan really difficult, like the lighting, the noise, the sensory clothing issue. All of those things contribute to quite a difficult time. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And the environment, although for the people who do the scans, the radiographers and the radiologists who are around, it is our place of work. For a patient who is coming for the first time, it can be quite daunting. And with all these sensory triggers around, it can be sometimes prohibiting of someone undertaking the scan. It's so easy to become overwhelmed from a sensory point of view, and the environment is not always very friendly.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. That's really interesting. Christina, my question for you before we move on about this is, I want to just focus on the impact all of this must have for the parents and the carers of the person with the severe learning disabilities that potentially has to be put under general anesthetic for this to happen, and all of the other complexities. I mean, from your experience, I imagine you must have seen the impact this must have had and the experience it is for the families. Like, could you give us some sort of examples of things that you've seen or the feeling that you've got when interacting with these parents? I imagine it must be so difficult.
Absolutely. Parents are, by definition, worrying. If the child has to undertake anesthesia for the scan, obviously with all the additional risks, the worry is even heightened in this situation. And there are some risks during anesthesia that they have to be discussed with parents. So this can be a very emotionally charged instance for them as they wait for the child to be anesthetized, and then they wait for the child to wake up, and they want to see how the child will wake up. And therefore, the clinical team has to be really alert and around. So it's quite a traumatic experience, and mental health wise, it's also for the family, also sometimes for the children. Depending on their age and how much they can remember the things they have experienced. And if this is the first experience the kids might have with the hospital, and it's traumatizing, then it might create a whole lot different implications for them when it comes to any other examination that relates to their health. So we have to be very careful.
Yes, such a good point, isn't it? And it's so crucial that it's as positive experience as possible, or at least minimising the anxiety and stress as much as possible. And let's just one last quick question before we go to a break. I mean, have you ever seen a situation where parents perhaps disagree with the need for anaesthetic, but clinically you think it, in terms of risk-benefit analysis, that it should happen? I mean, how do you deal with a situation like that?
Normally, it will not happen without the parent's approval. It should be discussed with the parent. The risk and benefits are explained to them, and depending on the child's age, obviously, yes. In this case, with learning disabilities, is a bit different in terms of consenting. It will have to have the parent's consent for that scan to happen under anesthesia. We cannot do it without their consent. I have never experienced a situation when there was disagreement, and that has happened, at least in my, under my clinical experience. So I'm not sure I can answer that question fully, but in all situations, the parents are advised, it is discussed with them, and there is a joint decision to proceed with anesthesia. Okay.
Thanks very much. That's really, really interesting. Okay, so now it's time for another short break. But after the break, we're going to hear Christina's top 10 recommendations for how we can make MRIs more accessible for autistic people and their families. So it's going to be really, really interesting. Stay tuned. A reminder that if you'd like to share your story of MRIs, or you've got a question for Christina or any of us, please do text it through. We're on 0737 661 1033. That's 0737 661 1033. Okay, welcome back everyone. This is All About Autism. So before we go to Christina's top 10 recommendations, I think it's useful, as always, to hear a little bit more from the autistic perspective. So Sophia, you mentioned earlier that you've actually had 2 MRI scans.
Yeah.
The first one didn't go that well, but the second one
didn't happen.
The first one didn't happen.
I didn't manage it at all.
Okay.
It wasn't until the second one that I was able to go through with the entire scan.
So could you just perhaps highlight what it was that went better for the second one that maybe wasn't there for the first one, so that we can learn from that?
So I think the biggest issue with the first one was that I didn't know what to expect. So that was challenging for me. I usually like to go and see where places are and see what things look like. But because I'd never had an MRI before, I didn't have that opportunity. And then once we'd got to the hospital, the MRI was being done in a mobile unit outside. So that's a really small space as it is. And then when I went in there and saw that I also had to get into another small space, I just immediately started to feel like really claustrophobic about it.
How old were you?
About 15 or 16.
Oh, right.
So I then lay down on the table, but as it was going in, I realised that it felt smaller and smaller. I also had the issue of having to change into a gown because I wasn't allowed to wear my own clothes. The radiographer at the time had given me a button to press if I was feeling anxious, so I could press it and come out. But she'd also said that if I pressed the button, we'd need to start the scan again. So although I had this button that I thought I could press this if I'm feeling too anxious, the thought of having to go through the whole thing again felt like a lot of pressure. So then I didn't manage it at all that time. The second time was much better. It was in a hospital. The room was much bigger.
Sorry, before you go on to the second one, so with the first one, did it get to the point where you said, I can't do this, this isn't happening, we're going to have to reschedule. Is that what
Yeah, so I
essentially
got as far
happened?
as lying down, going into the scanner, and I might have been there about 2 or 3 seconds, and I said, no. I can't do it.
Yeah.
But by that point, I'd already kind of built up all this anxiety because of the various things that had happened leading up to it.
Yeah, yeah.
So there was kind of no way of talking me around it by that stage either.
So there was no attempt to try and redirect you.
No, it was too late by then.
Too late, yeah.
Yeah, so then I had to
Okay.
wait about 6 months to have the next one done. So in the meantime, I was anxious about that, knowing that I'd have to do it again. But at least this time I knew what the MRI machine looked like. I was able to go online and listen to what it sounded like as well, although in reality it is much louder.
It's louder than that little 10-second clip.
Much louder than that clip, yep. And when I got to my second appointment for the scan, it was in a hospital, so the room was much bigger. The radiographer was really patient. They said that I could wear my own clothes because I didn't have any metal. I wore loose clothing, so I didn't have to change into a gown. They also, because it was a head scan, so I had a plastic thing over my face. They were able to put a little mirror on the top, so I could see my mum, who was in the room. They gave me countdowns, so every 2 minutes they let me know that 2 minutes had passed and there wasn't much longer to go. And I think the crucial thing they said was that if I did press the buzzer, that they would try to work with whatever they managed to get. So there wasn't a case of, if I press this and come out, there's going to be a third attempt, which I didn't think I was going to manage. They would work with whatever images they managed to get. So the second experience was much better.
Much better.
It was all through those kind of small adjustments that were made that made it easier for me to complete the scan.
Small adjustments, but significant.
Yeah, hugely.
I mean, why do you think the second one was so much better? Was it, I mean, obviously you had the mental preparation, you knew, etc. You knew what to expect and planned a little bit, but a lot of it wasn't in your control. It was down to what happened, in terms of the clinical side of things. Did the clinicians speak with you and your family beforehand to prepare? Did they look back at what went wrong the first time, or was it just pure luck that you just had a better time?
I think I was lucky that these radiographers were much more patient. They also allowed my mum to lie on the bed and slide her in and bring her back out, so that I could see that once you go in, you're not kind of trapped. So I was able to see it from a different perspective as well. Being able to see her in the other room too, because you're not allowed to have anybody in with you, was helpful.
Yeah. So it was just luck.
It was just a much more reassuring experience.
Wow. I mean, that's a bit worrying, isn't it? That it's just luck at the end of the day. We don't want healthcare service quality to come down to luck.
Consistent.
Yeah, we need it consistent. I guess that's an issue across all types of healthcare service issues, isn't it?
I think if I were to go for a scan now as an adult, I'd be better placed to advocate for myself and say what I need. But because it was a new experience for me and my family, none of us had MRIs before, you don't really know what you need. Yeah. Because you've never had it done before. So now that I've had the experience, I'm in a much better position to be able to say what works for me and what doesn't. But ideally, if radiographers can be a bit more aware of the particular challenges that autistic people might face having these sorts of tests, they can help reduce any impact that might have. Yeah,
and I know that's something that Christina feels very passionately about, right, Christina? And that's what you're doing, isn't it? Through your day job, through training radiographers to be more understanding and more aware of these issues and better equipped to provide the right kind of service. So, Christina, what do you make of that? What Sophia said, and how does that perhaps lead us into your top 10 recommendations? I'm assuming that some of them are kind of connected to some of the more positive experiences that Sophia described.
Absolutely. What Sophia said resonated with the things that were shared with us through our research so far. So I'm very happy to give you my top 10 if that's of interest for your listeners and for the team here.
Absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So, like Sophia explained, and like we have discussed and we have found in our research, which is funded by the Society and College of Radiographers in the UK, good and accessible information beforehand is really important. And accessible is accessible for autistic people. So, accessible means to offer different options. Some autistic people don't like to use the phone to get information. So this might be in the form of written information. It can be in the form of a video. It can be in the form of a podcast. we need to be able to give different formats of information before the scan, so people can be informed and prepared about what to expect.
Is that something that's already happening or not?
It is not happening, and this is actually half of the problem. People don't know what to expect, and this, exactly like Sophie explained, creates so much anxiety, unnecessary anxiety. And very often people avoid having the scan because they're not sure. They want to, undergo an MRI scan without knowing what to expect. So I think this is vital. The communication before the scan is 50% of the success of the scan and 50% of the patient experience. And it doesn't happen. Actually, it happens very poorly at the moment.
That's such a shame, isn't it? Because surely that's relatively straightforward and not very expensive to solve, provide the provision of good and accessible information. So that's something hopefully that we're going to see. Do you think that do you feel sort of optimistic that might be something that we can see over the next few years? Or, I mean, what's your view of that?
I am working on it, Chris. I would like to develop something that will enable the practitioners to create the right sort of information, because if they don't know that the person is autistic beforehand, and this is also another double-edged sword, that they don't know the person that they are scanning is autistic because their referral never gets to them with the right information, they don't know how to prepare. And the other side is that even if they know, sometimes they don't have the right training. So this part needs to be tackled urgently to ensure that the accessibility at that level is improved.
Thank you. Okay, what's your second?
The second one is a pre-visit of the MRI scanning facility. This was prohibitive during the COVID-19 restriction, times, but now that we are nearly back to normal, I would say, this means that you can go into the MRI environment, you can pre-arrange to go and meet with the staff, the people there, familiarize with the environment and the equipment that they will use. You can even lie down in the scanner, but you have to go through, obviously, all the metal checks for safety. And you can also ask about what to wear on the day. You might also want to bring, a soft toy or something to hold during the scan for soothing. So you can test all of these things on that day. The pre-visit is great to prepare you mentally and physically for the scan.
Okay.
And also you can request to the radiographers to record part of the session they plan to do for you, so you can play that recording at home to familiarize yourself, if you are the person who is scanned, beforehand, so you can get used to the sounds.
Okay. And with pre-visits, is that something that is happening now or not still? Is this something for the future, or is this happening?
It happens in different hospitals and clinics. It is, as you can imagine, really resource intensive, and our hospitals, particularly the NHS, our amazing NHS, is really overwhelmed after the pandemic. There are many long lists of MRI scans, and arranging for a pre-visit for someone who is not being scanned at that time, at the very precious time, is challenging. So it is important to ensure that we have realistic expectations of how long the pre-visit can take. And I mean, for every modification that happens, it means that on the actual day of the scan, there will be no hiccups. So actually, it's time well invested towards the success of the actual scan. But it has to be time that we have to find from other scanning lists. So it's very important, but it has to be planned thoroughly in advance and with the collaboration from the radiographers.
Okay, all right. Slightly worried about time, so let's move on to the third.
The third is also about arranging for the actual scan when it happens to be at a quieter time slot. So there's no, the regular buzz that happens in hospitals with people coming in and out, patients, staff, during a very busy day. So normally people arrange for a quieter time in the late afternoon, early evening. And this gives more time, more quiet time for the autistic person to acclimatize themselves and to not feel rushed.
Yeah. That's something that supermarkets and cinemas do sometimes in other spaces, right?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, Christina, all you've kind of listed as a parent, it alleviates so much anxiety. Like, as much information as you can possibly give makes such a difference, because then it just makes it kind of run smoother. So knowing where you're going, knowing what to expect, all those things that impacts on a parent as well taking their child is
good point.
It just makes such a difference,
Because all these things obviously directly impact the person having the scan, but the parent knows it's going to be good for the person.
Yes.
And then the parent's going to be calmer, isn't it? And then that has an additional benefit to the person, doesn't it? Because it always, so much of it comes through the parent, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, thank you, Christina. You can go on.
You can carry on with
It's getting
with
exciting.
your pot of gold here. The fourth one, please, Christina.
Yes. So the fourth is again about communication, but communication on the day of the scan. So we need to give clear instructions, give the time to our patient to ask their question, warn them about the vibration of the table so they are not alarmed, and also about the noise again, and make them comfortable with the use of pillows. In radiography, there is a whole set of different shapes and sizes of pillows that we can use to make sure that our patients are comfortable, because they have to lie in the scanner for some time and they have to lie still. So naturally, low back pain or any, knees, feeling uncomfortable or, getting a bit more, uneasy in the scanner is very normal and very much expected. So we need to make sure that we give them all the comforts, both emotional and physical, while they're being scanned.
Okay, what's number 5?
So number 5 is to try to distract them and entertain them, if possible, while they're in the scanner. Different scanners have different capabilities. Not every scanner has, for instance, a video, but for children, in children's hospitals, like our largest children's hospital in GOS, they have cameras, so kids can watch a movie while in the scanner, so the time flies faster and they're, distracted and entertained at the same time. More regularly, you will find music provisions in the scanner, so they can listen to that through headphones, or if they prefer, it can be totally quiet for them. It's about asking and making no assumptions, really, asking what they would like. And this is part of the entertainment / distraction during the scan, because it's a long scan, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and if someone is worried about something, everything comes through your mind at that point.
Okay, let's carry on with numbers 6 and 7, please, Christina.
6 and 7. So 6 is using cotton-only clothes for safety and soft, non-metallic toys for soothing. And 7 is make the scan as short as possible, as quiet as possible, and also explain how much time is left until the end, because autistic people want to know, and then when they know, then they don't feel as much anxious as being left in the dark about not knowing how much time is left.
And that was something that you benefited from, right, Sophia?
Yeah, I found that really helpful, knowing that it was going to come to an end at some point and just getting closer and closer to that.
Yeah, and also wearing your own clothes.
Wearing my own clothes,
yeah. Okay, thank you. And the final 3, 8, 9 and 10?
Final 3. I would like also to say that explaining the need to stay still, so we have good enough images for any diagnostic reasons, so to understand what is happening, and then breathing instructions. Sometimes people have to hold their breath while scanning to freeze the movement from the lungs for a period of time, like a few seconds really. So this has to be done beforehand, and we need to pilot a test with the patient before they lie in the scanner, and when they lie in the scanner before we actually get the images. Number 9 is we have to explain if we need to use any contrast, the dye, as I've explained before. So we have to explain to them that they might feel, this slight pain in their vein or the artery in the area, and then we have to explain what this entails. And there are things one can use to minimize that pain by using specific medication to minimize the pain in the area.
All right.
And the final one is to ensure that after all of that has happened, which someone can imagine can get really overwhelming, sensory, however much you have tried to minimize this sensory overload, to have some quiet space, a quiet room or a sensory room after the scan for the person or the child and their parents, if there is a child and their parent, to relax, before they either go, to use public transport or drive back home or walk back home, because this means that they have time to cool down a bit, relax, and then go.
Yeah, is that happening at the moment, or is that something for the future?
It's happening in very few places. The majority, this feels like a luxury, and it doesn't happen. But there are small things one can happen. There are many unused rooms that are used just for, for papers or for archives that can be moved in another space. And then this can be transformed with relatively very low budgets to make a very nice and quiet space that can be used for this reason.
I mean, the thing is with these 10 recommendations, I mean, they're so doable. It's not anything extraordinary or even too costly. So much of it is just about sensible, good accommodations that I suppose will benefit everybody, especially autistic people, right? So it's really a shame that we're not quite there with it yet. But I'm sure, Christina, if you sort of driving the path forwards with it, we'll get there soon, hopefully. Sophia.
Christina, what are the next steps and plans in making MRI scans more accessible for autistic people, and how can our listeners get in touch with you?
Thank you so much for that, Sophia. So I think there are many steps. As you can see, we're very ambitious because there are so many gaps at the moment to cover, and realistically the situation is that our lovely and amazing NHS is going through difficult times, so we have to be realistic and persistent to make a difference. So I think the first step, I would say, is guidance. One of the things that the people who participated in the research said is that we need more guidance, we need more recommendations for clinical practice. How do we do the scans? Because even if someone is a healthcare professional and they have the compassion, they have all the love, as we do for our patients, if you don't know exactly what to do for an autistic patient, what might upset them, what they might need, then you cannot offer these adjustments. You cannot offer the right communication. You cannot give them the scan experience that you aspire to give them, and they need to have a good experience. So one thing is guidance, and we work very closely with the Society and College of Radiographers and Dr. Tracy O'Regan, who is their assigned person for person-centered care, to try and create these standards over the next 18 months to 2 years. It takes time because it needs many stakeholders, and obviously the evidence is being created as we speak. So all the studies we're doing are going to fit into that.
Okay. Yeah.
Another step is training, like Chris said. So we need a lot of training, particularly for radiographers and radiologists and all the healthcare professionals involved in this space. And we do provide training at the moment at City, University of London, for autistic people. How do we work with them? How do we make their experience good? And this is targeted at healthcare professionals and particularly radiographers. But there's a lot of training happening at the moment, which is really good news, and I think the awareness is there, and things will be changing in the next 2 to 5 years in terms of training of the workforce in healthcare.
Okay, thank you so much, Christina. That's great. So, Christina, very, very quickly, how can listeners get in touch with you?
Well, they can find me at my City, University of London. They can search me by my name, Christina Malamateniou, and they can contact me via email. I'm very happy to share with them our research and happy to discuss with them about their experiences and how we can make things better.
Right.
It's really co-constructed with people with lived experiences, so we work with them to make things better for them.
Fantastic. So if there's anyone listening, any budding radiographers that are interested in this field, definitely get in touch with Christina, or if you've got any questions about the association with autism, again, Christina. So thank you very much for listening, everybody. That's a wrap for today's show. Our next show will take place on the 6th of April at 7 p.m, as always, the first Thursday of the month. I'd like to also remind you to pop into one of our charity community cafes to meet the community if you'd wish, to find support and connect with others. Currently, we have community cafes in Southgate, Wood Green, Islington and Ealing. We also have plans to launch 3 new schemes in Borough, Lewisham and South Woodford this year. All the information about these community cafes and how else the charity might be able to support you can be found at our website, which is www.londonautismgroupcharity.org. greek.org. Thanks again to my co-hosts Sophia and Ellie, our fantastic expert guest, Dr. Christina Malamateniou, also to the amazing Tony Neofidou for helping with everything in the background, and also James Gordon for his editorial input in the background. And finally, of course, most importantly, all of you lovely listeners, thanks a lot and have a good month.
This is London Greek Radio.